Have you ever stopped to think about how life, well, makes more life? It's this incredible process that's been going on for billions of years, creating everything from tiny little bacteria all the way up to, well, you. But here's the really wild part. Life is actually pretty terrible at making a perfect copy, and it turns out that's its greatest secret. Okay, let's dive right in.
I mean, really think about it. You might have your mom's eyes or your dad's smile, but you are not a carbon copy of either of them, are you? So why? Why doesn't life just have a perfect biological photocopier machine? Well, the answer is way more profound than you might think.
You see, every single organism passes its traits on to its children, right? Creating offspring that are super similar, but they are never, and I mean never, identical. This so-called perfect copy problem isn't a flaw in the system at all. In fact, it's the very engine that drives life itself.
To really understand this beautiful imperfection, we can't be looking at the big picture. We've got to zoom in, way in. We need to go down to the microscopic level, to the actual instruction manual that builds every single living thing. And that, my friends, brings us to the absolute star of our show, DNA. The reason you're not a perfect copy? It all comes down to these tiny, almost creative mistakes that happen every single time this amazing molecule gets duplicated. So what is DNA? In a nutshell, it's the blueprint. It's got all the instructions for building and operating an organism, a plant, an animal, you name it. And when a new life is created, this blueprint, this instruction manual, has to be passed on. The real question is, how does it get copied? Okay, imagine the DNA from a parent cell goes into a kind of biological photocopy machine. As it's getting scanned and copied, tiny, random errors just pop up. A little smudge here, a slight color change there. The result? You get two new cells that are almost identical, but each has its own slight unique differences. And that right there is what we call variation. Those little copying errors are what create all the differences between individuals. And I really can't stress this enough. In the grand story of life, this is not a bug. It is the single most important feature. But is it always a good thing? Not always, no. For an entire species to survive and adapt, variation is absolutely essential. But for one single organism, a random change can actually be a complete disaster. Just take this moth, for example. A variation in its DNA changed its color, making it stick out like a sore thumb to predators. So for that one moth, that little feature was a death sentence. So, faced with this whole situation, life basically evolved two major strategies for making copies. On one side, you've got the asexual, or cloning strategy. This one's fast, it's simple, and it makes nearly identical copies with very low variation. And on the other side, you've got the sexual, or remixing strategy. This one is slower, way more complex, but its entire purpose is to crank up the variation. All right, let's start with the cloners. Asexual reproduction is all about pure efficiency. It's the absolute fastest way to reproduce when things are going great, and you just need to make more of yourself, like right now. The most basic way to do this is called fission. An organism, like an amoeba, just grows to a certain size and then, poof, it splits right down the middle, creating two near-perfect clones. It's simple, it's effective, and it is unbelievably fast. Then you've got something called fragmentation. This is where an organism, like this Spirogyra algae you see in ponds, can literally break into pieces, and each one of those fragments has the incredible ability to grow into a whole new organism. It's kind of like a real-life magic trick. And finally, there's budding. With this method, a little mini version of the parent literally starts growing on the side of the original. Once it gets big enough, it just pops right off and goes on to start its own life. You see this all the time in organisms like yeast and hydra. Okay, so now let's flip over to that other approach. Sexual reproduction, the remixing strategy, isn't about making perfect copies at all. No, its whole deal is about taking the genetic blueprints from two different parents and deliberately shuffling them all together to create something totally new and unique. To really get a handle on this, a flower is the perfect example. Let's start with the male parts, which are called the stamen. Right at the top here is the anther, and its job is to produce pollen. Just think of pollen grains as tiny little capsules that carry the male reproductive cells. And now for the other half of the equation. The female parts, called the pistil, have a few components. There's a sticky stigma at the top that's designed to catch pollen, a tube called the style, and down at the base, the ovary, which holds the ovules, and those are the female reproductive cells. So how does this big genetic remix happen? Well, it's basically a three-step process. First up is pollination. Pollen has to get from an anther to a stigma. Step 2, fertilization. That male cell travels all the way down and fuses with the female cell inside the ovule. And finally, formation. That fertilized ovule becomes the seed, and the ovary around it swells up to become a fruit.
And all of that brings us full circle right back to our original question. We've seen how life makes copies of itself through both cloning and remixing. So why is being an imperfect copy full of all this variation actually life's greatest strength?
Here's the bottom line. Variation is a species superpower. It's what allows a whole population to adapt when its environment suddenly changes. It's the raw material for evolution itself. Think about it. If every single individual was a perfect clone, one single disease or one new predator could wipe out the entire species in one go. Imperfection is survival. It's what creates the amazing diversity of life we see all around us.
So it turns out life's so-called mistakes are precisely what allow it to adapt, to evolve, and to flourish across our planet. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If variation is the absolute key to resilience and survival, what is the ultimate risk of perfect uniformity?